She walked in wearing plain clothes, asking for her first-class seat, but the staff laughed, mocked her, and denied her boarding. Moments later, the airport went silent when they discovered the truth. She owned the airline. Here's how one woman taught them a lesson in humility and power. The airport buzzed with its usual rhythm, wheels rolling, announcements echoing, hurried footsteps blending into a constant hum. Amidst the flow of travelers, a woman stepped through the glass doors, unnoticed by most. She moved slowly but with purpose, her appearance quiet and unassuming. Her clothes were plain, an ironed cotton kurta, slacks that had clearly seen many seasons, and sandals worn from use. Over one shoulder hung a weathered handbag with soft creases in the leather, the kind that told stories of time rather than fashion. She looked like someone used to long journeys, not just in miles, but in life. She stood in line at the first-class check-in counter, her posture straight, her gaze steady, her hands holding her documents with quiet confidence. Around her, travelers in branded suits and polished shoes barely glanced in her direction, but the staff behind the counter noticed. One of them, a young man with a crisp uniform and a practiced smile, watched her closely, the smile fading into a smirk as she stepped forward. He gave her a quick up-and-down glance, eyes pausing on her clothes, her sandals, her bag, calculating silently that she didn't belong in the line she was standing in. As she handed over her ticket and identification, the staff's skepticism became visible. The way they leaned in slightly, whispering to each other behind cupped hands, casting side glances while maintaining forced professionalism. One of them questioned her with thinly veiled disbelief, as if expecting her to admit she had made a mistake. The woman remained composed, her voice low and polite as she responded. But their minds were already made up. Her appearance didn't match their expectations of a first-class traveler, and because of that, they refused to see who she truly was. The woman stood quietly at the counter, her documents still in hand, while the staff exchanged skeptical glances. One of them leaned slightly forward, tilting his head with a practiced smile that barely concealed his doubt. In a tone dressed with politeness, but dripping with condescension, he asked her to confirm whether she was certain she had booked a first-class seat. The question wasn't genuine. It was rhetorical, a subtle way to suggest that someone like her couldn't possibly afford such a ticket. Another staff member joined him, peering over the computer screen, whispering just loud enough for nearby passengers to catch fragments, words like mistake, confused, and recheck. The woman nodded softly, offering her confirmation again, her tone even and respectful. But their expressions didn't shift. The young man glanced at her ticket, and then at her again, this time with a faint chuckle under his breath. He suggested, in an overly cheerful voice, that she may have printed the wrong boarding pass, or perhaps misunderstood the booking process. His colleague chimed in, asking if she had ever flown first class before, implying that the experience might be unfamiliar or intimidating. Their words were sharp but polished, rehearsed to sound professional while still cutting deep. A small crowd began to form. Passengers nearby pretended not to stare, but their eyes lingered, curious and quietly judging. The scene was uncomfortable but not loud. There was no shouting, only a growing tension wrapped in civility. The woman attempted once more to explain, gently pointing to the confirmed booking on her ticket. But before she could finish, she was interrupted and gestured toward the economy line without further discussion. The dismissal was swift and final. Still, she did not argue. She simply stood still, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady. There was no anger in her eyes, only a calm that unsettled those around her. Her silence became louder than their assumptions. As the staff returned to their duties with smirks and shrugging shoulders, no one noticed the shift in air, the quiet storm they had just invited, by misjudging a woman who never needed to raise her voice to prove her worth. Just as the staff turned their attention to the next passenger, a tall man in a dark suit walked past the counter. His pace was brisk, his demeanor sharp, until his eyes landed on the woman standing quietly to the side. In an instant, his stride broke. He paused, blinked once, then twice, and immediately turned around. Without hesitation, he walked up to her, his expression transforming from routine urgency to stunned recognition. In front of everyone, passengers, staff, and security, he bowed his head slightly and greeted her with unmistakable respect. The air shifted. Conversations around them faded. All eyes turned.
The young staff who had mocked her only moments ago stiffened. Confusion swept across their faces as they watched the senior official speak to her with the kind of deference reserved for someone far above them. He called her Madam, his voice low and reverent, and asked if everything was all right. The woman merely nodded, offering a faint, kind smile. She did not expose anyone, did not complain, but her silence now spoke louder than ever. The staff looked at each other, panic starting to bloom in their eyes. Whispers spread through the counter, heads turned, faces drained of color. It didn't take long for the truth to unfold. She wasn't just a first-class passenger. She was the founder and owner of the airline, the very person who had built the company they worked for, the one who had started from nothing, once selling homemade snacks at bus stations, slowly saving, learning, dreaming. She had taken her first flight as a customer decades ago, promising herself she would one day create an airline that treated everyone with dignity. That dream had become reality. Her story had inspired thousands, but today it reminded the few standing before her that status is never worn. It is lived. Now, frozen in disbelief, the staff scrambled to fix what could not be undone. Apologies tumbled from their mouths. The arrogance that once coded their words dissolved into stammering regret. But the woman said nothing more. She had no need to explain herself. Her presence alone, now fully recognized, was enough to humble every eye that had once looked down on her. The counter was now a scene of quiet chaos. The staff, once so sure of themselves, scrambled to recover from their mistake. Apologies came in waves, clumsy, nervous, and overly eager. The same hands that had once gestured her toward the economy line now rushed to escort her properly, offering to carry her bag, to upgrade her boarding process, to make amends in any way possible. Their voices, once sharp with judgment, were now soft and pleading, but the woman remained composed. She accepted none of their offers, nor did she reject them with harshness. She simply stood, listening, her silence measured and dignified. After a long pause, when one of them finally asked if she would like to file a formal complaint, she looked up with calm eyes and spoke only one sentence. "Respect," she said gently, "should never depend on appearance." Her voice was steady, almost kind, without the slightest hint of anger. And with that, she turned and walked toward the boarding gate, her steps unhurried, her presence now commanding a different kind of attention, not because of who she was, but because of how she carried herself in the face of small minds. From a nearby waiting area, a young traveler who had witnessed the entire exchange pulled out a phone and typed quickly. Within minutes, a post appeared online, describing the moment a woman was mistaken for a nobody and later revealed to be the very owner of the airline. The story spread like wildfire. Photos were shared, videos uploaded, words of praise poured in. People across the internet commended her composure, her humility, her silent strength. They condemned the staff's shallow judgments and called it a lesson for every service desk in the world. But the woman never responded to the headlines. She didn't seek attention. She simply boarded her flight, took her seat in first class, and stared out the window, not as a businesswoman proving a point, but as a human being who had lived long enough to understand that dignity doesn't shout. It simply walks away with grace. The incident, though quietly handled by the woman herself, did not go unnoticed by the airline's leadership once the story reached the public. An internal review was launched immediately. The video clips and witness accounts were carefully examined, and the staff involved were called in for questioning. Some were issued formal warnings, while others were enrolled in retraining programs focused on professional conduct and empathy. It was no longer just about policy. It was about the image and values the airline claimed to uphold. One of the young staff members, shaken by the realization of his actions, took the time to write a handwritten letter of apology. It was sincere, filled with regret, and mailed directly to the woman's address. She received the letter days later and responded with grace. Her reply was not filled with anger or judgment, but with encouragement. She urged the young man to learn from his mistake, to treat every customer with respect, and to never let appearances cloud his understanding of others. Her forgiveness, paired with her calm authority, left a lasting impression. Weeks later, the woman was invited to speak at a leadership conference hosted by the airline. She stood on stage in the same simple attire, sharing her story, not of wealth or success, but of moments like these that tested character. She spoke of dignity, humility, and the quiet strength in choosing grace over ego. Her words resonated deeply. Inspired by her message, the airline implemented a new training module focused entirely on empathy, respect, and inclusion. From that point forward, her influence shaped not just a company, but the hearts of those within it. And all of it began with one simple woman, who chose to remain kind even when the world failed to recognize her.